Welcome back to Live, Laugh, Lore, the podcast where we dive into the eerie, the mysterious, and the downright terrifying. I'm Emily.
I'm Caroline. Yay!
Yay!
How's it going? How's your Sunday?
It's going great. I've been sleeping for most of it. And also, if anyone's
Nice.
watching on YouTube, yes, I still have my Christmas decorations up. And
Was just looking at that.
yeah, it's still within the realm of Christmas time.
No, it's January 5th. Yeah, today I got up really early and I started writing my thing and it took me forever. I got really excited about this topic and then the excitement waned at the end, but it didn't
Yeah.
get less complicated. I was like, oh, I don't know that I have the mental capacity to finish this, but
Is
I
it
did.
another true crime one?
It's not true crime.
Okay. I want to guess what this.
Guess.
No,
Did
no,
you
no.
look at the
I
one
need
now?
clues. No, I did not.
Oh my gosh. Well, I was gonna, that's so weird. This is Emily.
What?
It's like we're connected or something. Because this is what I was gonna have you guess.
Oh,
Because I think you'll easily be able to guess. So
okay.
this is a story. This
A
is a
story.
story of a girl.
Okay.
Um, sorry, I had this like whole introduction and I have to read it because I spent so long. So the story is it's not an urban legend and it's not really a part of folklore, but it is part of history and it is certainly legendary and
Okay.
mysterious. It's a story that was actually introduced to me by you a couple years ago.
Is it the Donner Party?
Yeah, it's the Donner Party.
Ah!
So it is kind of like it's not really true crime. I wouldn't say the Donner Party, but it's like
Uh,
it's creepy as hell.
it's creepy. It still blows my mind that you did not learn about the Donner Party in school.
Yeah. So I think we
Like,
need to actually take a trip down memory lane and explain to everyone how this came about. So 2 years ago, two, three, three. Oh my gosh, that was 3 years
oh
ago.
my
Okay.
God. Okay. Well, now I
Three
want to
years
throw up.
ago, I helped Emily move from Charleston to Salt Lake City, and we
Horrible mistake.
drove across the country.
Yeah.
And
With
I've
two
said
cats
this
in the car.
with two cats. And we've
Yeah.
talked about our spooky experiences in the closet in Nashville. And
Yeah.
it turns out when I go on trips, I'm scared like most of the time.
I don't know what that, I mean, honestly, the rest of the places that we stayed in were fine
The place
in
we
a
stayed in Salt
space.
Lake City scared the shit out of me. That one scared me so
Oh,
bad.
yeah, that place was kind of spooky. Just
I
the
would,
layout and the way, like,
yeah.
yeah.
You
And it
told me
was,
like a door opened after I left or something.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. Everywhere was dark in there, the way that the lighting worked. You turn on one light and it only lit a small little square space.
Yeah, it was just
It's like
really creepy. It was really weird. But
very weird.
um yeah, when we drove, we drove South Carolina up. I don't even remember all the states, but then we got to Colorado and Utah,
Yeah.
and obviously the mountains got quite large. And like when we were
Beautiful.
in Utah, I remember, yeah, sure, beautiful. Um,
And it was
if you
around
like,
this time of year, right?
it was
End of
February.
January, February. Yeah.
hmm Yeah, I guess it was end of January. Yeah, I don't like the mountains. I've said this before. They're
Yeah.
beautiful. I will give them that, but they freak me out. They freak me
What's
out.
going on up there? What's going
I don't
on?
know. Well, I'm about to tell you
hmm
something crazy. I don't really remember what we were talking about, but do remember where we were, and it was like mountains, like up to your
Huge mountains,
ears.
yeah, with like
Dude,
a
and you're just
two-lane
driving.
road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2 lane road. We're just winding through, and I was like, I hate this. It was snowing, and I was like, I'm so scared. And then you'd see like random cabins, and I was like,
Uh-huh.
I don't even remember how you brought it up, but then you were like, yeah, it's like the Donner Party.
I think I
Or
was like, have you heard of the Donner Party? This will
I feel
freak
like
you
it was
out.
something I was like, do people like die out here traveling? Oh, yeah, because I was so interested in the pioneer thing. I had never
Yeah.
seen, because I grew up on the East Coast, so like pioneers weren't a thing. We didn't learn, well, I mean, we did, but not.
Yeah, but not the same.
Um, yeah, not in the same way. And so I
hmm
feel like I brought it up and you were like, yeah, people die like the Donner Party. And I was like, Jeffrey Dahmer? Like that's what I thought you meant. And then you're like, no, it was a group of people that got lost and they ate each other. And I was like, spoiler
What?
alert.
Yeah. If you did not
Who
grow up in
is?
California like I did, we learned about the Donner Party. We had to read, I forget what the book was called, but it was assigned reading. We had to learn all about the Donner Party, like read their letters, like their diaries
No,
that they had. Yeah.
I never learned
Very
about it.
interesting. I learned about this in elementary school, and I'm over here in fifth, sixth grade learning about people eating each other. And I'm like, wow,
Right.
this is important for me
Yeah.
to know. I don't remember how to do basic math sometimes, but I remember the Donner Party. That stuck with me. So,
Yeah. Once you told me, I remember pulling it up and reading about it, and I was like, oh, this is disgusting. And now I'm enthralled. I
yeah.
hyperfixated on it for literally 2 weeks. I read everything I could read. I listened to every podcast. Honestly, I love this story. It is so freaky.
I'm excited to learn more. It's been a very long time
Yeah.
since I've heard anything or read anything about the Donner Party. It's very
Yeah.
interesting.
And
I just
like,
thought this was
I mean, I
something everybody
guess
knew about. So,
it's not. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know like if maybe they did teach it. I didn't really pay a lot of attention in school or
maybe I just had a really weird history teacher that had a very specific interest.
yes. This is so I did want to put a little disclaimer before we did this
Hmm.
because it gets real bad at the end. I encourage you to still listen,
Hmm.
but if you're eating like meat, maybe just like put it down. I actually had to like get up and walk away at one point this morning because I was like, I'm gonna
Oh,
puke.
good.
There was a podcast I listened to a couple years ago, so like, and they had so much detail. I use them also as a reference, but their podcast made me throw up. So anyway,
Okay. All right.
but the beginning is just history, and we crack into it.
Okay. All right. Well, let's skip the small talk then. Just dive right in. Sounds
Let's
good to
just
me.
go. Okay, so we start this journey in the 1840s, specifically in 1845. There was a term coined by a man named John O'Sullivan. This term represented the belief that the US was destined to expand across North America. This term was manifest destiny, if you listened at all in high school. I do remember that term, but this is much more interesting now.
Yes.
And I remember thinking Manifest Destiny was stupid. I still think it's actually
I
stupid
mean,
because people don't have the right to just claim land. And then this
it's still kind of
caused a
dumb.
lot
Yeah.
of issues.
Yeah.
But during this time, a lot of American families were traveling westward to farm the fertile land, explore the economic opportunities, and claim the free land of the West. Thus, the Oregon Trail started. It started in Independence, Missouri, and it ended in Oregon City, Oregon. Typically, the journey took about 4 to 6 months. Pioneers would travel from 15 to 20 miles a day. So they would get in these big bandwagons. Haha. Is that what it's called?
Yeah. I think
Okay.
so.
It just like huge parties, and they would go across the country. And for 4 to 6 months, these giant parties of wagons.
Hmm.
So the Oregon Trail was a dedicated route that had been taken by a lot of people. And because it had been used so much, you could see the trail. It was easy to follow.
You could see
Get
me
off the
dying of
path or
dysentery off to the side.
exactly, or tuberculosis or whatever.
Did you play that game
All
as a kid?
no, I never played it.
The Oregon Trail, you never
This
played it?
no, but this
Oh my
whole
God.
thing reminds me of Red Dead Redemption 2 because like the God, I'm such a nerd. Because like the first scene, he's on the side of a fucking mountain getting this guy off. It's just
Getting
crazy.
this, he's doing what to this guy?
There's no, sorry.
Like, whoa.
I'm too excited.
Keep pressing the A button.
There's a guy like sitting on the side of a mountain, and you're like climbing the mountain to get to this dude, and it's just the craziest thing. You're like, what the hell are you doing up here, man? Anyway, reminded me of this.
Well, the game was hilarious because you die of dysentery like almost every single time that you
Yeah,
play.
right,
And it was like
right.
this, it just comes up with like a wagon and you died of dysentery.
Yeah,
Like,
I've
not again.
seen the memes and everything. I just never
Yeah.
played it.
I was obsessed as a kid.
Sure,
I
they
would go
have
to
it
the
on the
library and I would
internet somewhere.
play Oregon Trail for hours.
Yeah,
Because that was cool in school.
exactly.
Yeah.
So, again, Oregon Trail, easily marked. People could see where people had been traveling for quite some time, but this took 4 to 6 months. So there was a man named Lansford Hastings who encouraged settlers to use an alternate route to the Oregon Trail. It was supposedly more direct to California and it would save like 300 miles of travel. It sounded great, sounded fun. So instead of passing through Idaho, Hastings' route went through Utah, and trekked through Weber Canyon, which was apparently steep. Also, if I mispronounce anything, since you were lived in Utah, please let me know.
I think it's Weber.
Weber,
I think
Weber.
so.
Yeah, Weber Canyon. So Weber Canyon was super steep. It was a very dangerous path, and it actually involved walking through quick moving water between steep walls of quartz rock. So I'm envisioning what we drove through.
Yeah. Yeah.
So after this, travelers had to cross the salt flats of the Great Salt Lake, which sounds terrible, which is 80 miles with literally no water.
Hmm.
Hastings claimed that his route would save time and he would meet anyone who was interested in traveling with him in Fort Bridger to take them to California. But Hastings had never actually taken this route, even though he claimed it would save so much time.
That sounds just like my dad, RIP. But like, he would find the weirdest routes to go places. He'd be like, it's going to save us 5 minutes.
My,
Dad,
my
why
dad
are we
does that
doing this?
too. My dad does that every time we drive. It's mostly a man
Oh,
thing. Like, and it was just in the car. Me, my mom, and my sister were like, no, no, don't go that way. It takes so long. I swear men do that.
oh my God.
They
No,
don't use GPSs. They just know.
they just know. They just know, which
It's
honestly,
so
great.
weird.
Good for them.
Good for
I'm
them.
happy. I'm happy for them. But I'm like, do we have to take the weirdest,
Yeah.
most like backcountry road,
I know.
like endanger our lives just so we can
Like
save
terrified
five
of hitting a
minutes?
deer.
What is the
It's
just
never it's never 5 minutes and it always takes longer.
it always takes longer. My dad is
It's
rolling in his
just
urn right now. I'm sorry.
rolling in his urn.
Anyways.
Okay. After you said RIP, I was like, what do you mean? And I was like, oh, wait.
What do you He's dead, Caroline.
I know, I remember now.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Anyways, you gotta laugh.
Moving
Anyways.
on. He'd never taken any of his route that he said. So in 1846, several families began to join the westward movement, including the Donner and Reed family, who lived in Springfield, Illinois. The head of these families were George and Jacob Donner and James Reed. The families left Springfield on April 14th, 1846, with the party initially totaling 31 people. Within a month, the Donners and Reeds had reached Independence, Missouri, and on May 12th, they became part of a main wagon train headed west to the Oregon Trail. The party was nearly 90 people in total. I think it eventually got to this. It's like so difficult to find the actual number at each time, but eventually it got to like 87 people. They all planned on taking this shortcut through Hastings Cutoff in order to save time. By June 16th, the company had already traveled 450 miles with about 200 miles to go before reaching where they were supposed to meet Hastings. They had been delayed by rain and a rising river, and Tamsin Donner, George Donner's wife, wrote to a friend in Springfield and said, indeed, if I do not experience something far worse than I have yet done, I shall say the trouble is all in getting started. The beginning of their journey was apparently not easy. It sounds like it just gets worse, but they did not have an easy go at any of this.
So you might have already mentioned this. How many people was in the Donner family?
In the Donner family, I don't know, but between the Reed and the Donner family, it was 31 people. So it was
Wow.
quite large.
And that included like kids too, right?
There were children younger than one.
No.
Yeah, they were young and they survived. It was crazy.
Jesus Christ.
Let's see, it was 87 people in total, 29 men, 15 women, 43 children. So they met up once they got to Missouri,
Uh-huh.
that's when they found
God.
Florida. They've met up with a lot of different families. This is hard because there are so many people in this story, so I'm just going to throw a lot of names
Mhm.
out, but just I mean the Donner family, the Reed family, are kind of the main people, but there's a lot more people that come in.
All right.
Now, like I said, this takes about 4 to 6 months. They say the best time to start this is in April. They started it in May, so they were a month late. They said that the best time to start was April because it allowed enough time for the grass to continue to grow, for the livestock to eat, and then also
Mhm.
avoiding winter when they were passing through the mountain ranges. And the Sierra Nevada mountain range was the most dangerous part of the journey. The mountain range has
Nevada.
over Nevada. Whatever. I'm gonna do it so many times.
No, it's fine. I
Um,
think that would be a great poll to ask our listeners too. How do you pronounce
Nevada or
Nevada? Do you pronounce it
Nevada.
correctly or do you say Nevada?
I know.
The East
It's
Coasters.
I get confused now because I genuinely just don't know what it is supposed to be anymore because you guys I've been corrected so many times and now I'm like, I don't know.
So everyone on the East Coast who have never been to Nevada, they're like, it's Nevada. I'm like,
Yeah.
bitch, you've never stepped foot in Nevada.
Nevada.
I
It's
grew
like
up
when
right next
people
door.
say Appalachian, there's nothing that
Yes,
irritates me more.
I was one of those people when I moved out there, you know.
God, I hate when people say that.
I was corrected
Nevada.
quickly.
I'm gonna try really hard. In the Sierra Nevada mountain ranges. So it has over 500 distinct peaks and it's over 12,000 feet high. It receives more snow than most mountain ranges in North America due to its height and proximity to the Pacific Ocean. So timing is crucial
Mhm.
because if not, you're screwed. So
Wow.
enter a man named James Kleiman, who was actually a friend of James Reed, and he had accompanied Hastings east from California. Kleiman ran into James Reed in Fort Laramie, and Kleiman actually warned Reed not to take Hastings cutoff, and he told him to take the regular wagon track and never leave it. It is barely impossible to get through if you follow it, and it may be impossible if you don't. And Reed replied, there's a higher route, and it is of no use to take so much of a roundabout course. Kleiman told him I admitted the fact, but told him about the great desert and the roughness of the Sierras, and that a straight route might turn out to be impractical. So he tried to warn him to not go into Hastings Cutoff, but Reed was adamant to go there.
Do you remember James Reed from Charleston?
Yeah,
That sounds like something that James Reed would do.
I
James.
loved James Reed.
I love
He was
James.
like
He's
he
great. I
was
would
like
follow him into the mountains.
he is a good he's a good person.
He's a good person. He's a good guy.
He's good
James, if you're
people.
listening, he's good people. I would follow
Yeah.
you. I might argue with you, but I would follow you and
Yeah.
maybe die.
Yeah, he was great.
We'll be laughing the whole way.
He's the funniest person I've ever met, truly. There was also a man named Edwin Bryant who tried to warn the families, stating that it would be impossible to pass this by wagon, but his letters never made it to the company. It turns out that there was a man named Jim Bridgers who owned a trading post that was on the route. He never delivered the letters to the Donner Party, but he figured if more people used this route, his trading post would get better business. And he held these away from the Donner Party because he just wanted more business. He didn't want to tell people not to go through.
That's horrible.
Yeah, it's actually really terrible. And so he actually encouraged them and he told Reed that Hastings Cutoff was a smooth trip devoid of hostile Native Americans and would shorten their journey greatly, and water would be very easy to find. He was lying,
How
lying.
how can you be okay with yourself doing like you're looking at
Yeah,
women and children,
I mean,
families,
yeah, I
and
know.
lying to their face?
I
Horrendous
mean, to be
behavior.
fair, he probably didn't know how bad it was going to get. It was interesting because Hastings did
Mm.
eventually pass through it twice, but he never once took a wagon. So he just had horses and men. It was significantly easier because you got to think like wagons are huge. They
Yeah.
can't. So yeah, he never actually tested it with a wagon. More to come on that. So the Donner Party continued ahead with the plan to take the shorter route. By the time they reached Fort Bridger, Hastings, who had promised to guide their party along, was not there. He'd already left with another party. So the responsibility fell on Reed to act as the party's guide. He
So
was head
where is
of
Fort
everything.
Bridger again?
I believe in Wyoming. I think so.
Because Laramie is
Yeah.
in Wyoming.
That's
So
in Wyoming. So they stopped at Fort Laramie first and then went down to Bridger.
got it.
The West was hard.
No,
They're all
that makes sense.
square.
They're all square. They're just stacked on top.
They really are.
Yeah.
So they continue through and they take the route of Hastings Cutoff. The first week, they made pretty good progress, and then it quickly turned south, and their troubles began to grow. Within days, the terrain became much more difficult than described, and the path was not easy to find. Hastings, who was about 11 days ahead of the Donner Party, left notes along the route, and on August 6th, the party found a letter from him advising the party to stop until he could show them an alternate route. So he was like, this is actually horrible.
Okay, well, at least you did that.
Yeah.
I
So
feel like not enough questions are being asked. Like, hey, have you done this before?
yeah, it's a lot of like overconfidence, and
Yeah.
I think they realize that as they go on, but
Yeah.
they should have stopped. Reed and two other members, Charles Stanton and William Pike, rode ahead to attempt to find Hastings, but encountered terrain that was even more difficult. Canyons where boulders had to be moved, walls that cut off into a rushing river below, which is very difficult to bring a wagon on. Reed returned to the group alone and they discussed turning back or continuing on, but Reed continued to encourage them to keep going on the new Hastings route. Their progress slowed to about 1.5 miles a day, and all able bodied men were required to clear brush, fallen trees, and remove rocks in order to make ways for the wagon. So they were going from 15 to 20 miles a day to now 1.5 miles, and they had a long way to go.
Mhm.
So once they made it through the Wasatch Mountain Range, another family caught up with them, which was the Graves. So there's lots of different families. The Graves has now been added. There's the Stanton family, the Pike family, the Graves, Donners, Reeds. There's more, but the Graves were the last group to leave Missouri, and they brought the party to a total of 87 members, and they had 60 to 80 wagons.
Wow.
Took another 2 weeks for them to travel out of the Wasatch Range, and tensions began to rise among members. Food and supplies began to run out. At one point, Stanton, Pike, and Reed had ridden out with their horses and became lost. What the hell was
Did you
that?
hear that?
Yeah.
That was a car outside my apartment.
Oh my God, this
That
scared
scared the
the
fuck out of me. I was like, why is there a chainsaw in my apartment?
I'm gonna cry. That scared me so bad. I thought that was a man coughing. That's what it, or like sneezing.
No, it was somebody revving their engine. That was so fucking loud. Okay.
Both of our eyes were like,
I thought I was about to die. I was like, it's behind me, isn't it?
no, because this story freaks me the hell out.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's part of the reason why I
Okay.
was scared in Utah because I was reading about this and I was like, this
Yeah,
really
yeah,
bugged
you
me.
were.
I wouldn't stop reading about it. I think at one point you were like, stop reading
Stop
it.
telling me about this. Okay.
When they finally found the rest of the group, they were only a day away from eating their horses. So they were getting pretty hungry. Not the worst
Mhm.
thing they did. On August 25th, one member, Luke Halloran, died of tuberculosis. He actually had tuberculosis before they left, so he was kind of a goner. A few days later, a letter from Hastings arrived indicating that there were 2 days and 2 nights of very difficult travel ahead with no grass or water. The party decided to rest before attempting to cross the 1,000-foot mountain in their path. From its peak, they could see the Great Salt Lake Desert, which is known as one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The Donner Party moved onward and started to attempt to cross the salty desert. This is in August, so it was warm. And in the heat, the moisture underneath the salt crust rose up and turned the terrain gummy. Many of the members actually began hallucinating, I'm assuming from dehydration, and they believed that they saw lakes and wagons, indicating that they had already made it through the cutoff. After 3 days, the water was completely gone. Ox were removed from the wagons to try and move ahead, and some of the animals were so weak that they left some attached to the wagon and abandoned. A couple of them did break free and just bolted off into the desert, crazed with thirst. The journey damaged some wagons, but luckily during this part, nobody died. And instead of the 2 day journey promised, it took them a total of 6 days to cross the Great Salt Lake Desert. So it's not saving literally any time.
That was something that I don't know why it shocked me. Salt Lake is very cold in the
Yeah.
winter, but it is a desert. It is
Yeah.
hot as
Mm-hmm.
fuck in the
Mm-hmm.
summer. And it goes from being boiling hot and then the next
Mm-hmm.
day everything's frozen. It's like,
Yeah.
what the hell?
Yeah.
So yes, I hated it.
So the party finally reached a spring on the other side of the desert, but they still had more to go. And they stopped to recover. All faith at this point in the cutoff was lost, and the party began to get pretty desperate. Reed's family suffered greatly, and he began asking the other families for food. It was suggested that two of the men go to Sutter's Fort in California to try and get more food and bring it back. Charles Stanton and William McCutcheon volunteered to take this trip, and they went across the next 40 miles of the desert that lay ahead. The next stretch of the desert was not nearly as difficult as the first, and they continued to follow Hastings' fated tracks despite their reluctancy to do so. Finally, on September 26th, the party rejoined the traditional trail along a stream known as the Humboldt River. So they started late. Now they're even later. Bad, bad, bad. Along the river, they met a group of Native Americans who stayed briefly but eventually stole and shot several oxen and horses. Tensions were high. By
Yes.
late October, the different families began to split off to make better progress. In the remaining group, two wagons became entangled, and a man named John Snyder was very frustrated, began to beat an ox that belonged to Reed's teamster. James Reed intervened. Snyder struck him and his wife, prompting Reed to fatally stab Snyder.
Yeah, fuck him.
Yeah.
Fuck you, Snyder.
So, yeah.
Good riddance for that guy. Sorry.
The group convened and decided Reed's fate. Some said that they think he should be hung, but
I'm sorry. A man is going after my ox and then my wife,
yeah,
and you want me to be cool and chill about it?
yeah.
Fuck you.
Um,
No.
they banished him. George Donner at this point was a day ahead, and they decided that Reed would be banished rather than hanged. The next morning, Reed departed alone, although his stepdaughter secretly gave him a rifle and food to help.
What?
Continuing, yeah. So they completely banished this
Okay.
man.
Wasn't he the leader of the group?
Yes. So I believe one of the Donners, it was either George or I can't remember which one steps up and becomes the, or
All
which one it
because
is.
of some guy that went crazy? Okay.
Yeah, but I
I'm
guess he
already
killed him,
angry.
so they were, I don't know.
You hit my wife. You hit my
I
ox.
know. I know.
I'll kill
So,
you. My goodness. Sorry.
continuing on, everyone was expected to walk. They wanted to relieve the animal's load. There was obviously just super heavy in the wagon, and an elderly man was ejected from the wagon, and he was told that he has to walk or die. A few days later, the man sat next to a stream. His feet were so swollen that they had split open, and the man was never seen again. So it was literally every man for themselves.
I mean, okay, I get this has been a very long time. Tensions are very high, and they're probably
Hmm.
not in their right mind, from
No,
like
not at all.
starving and being thirsty and all of that. But
Hmm.
like some
I know.
unnecessary, seemingly unnecessary decisions are being made here. But okay. All
Hmm.
right. Continue.
So, meanwhile, the rest of the group's struggles worsened. Native Americans chased off the group's horses. They stole 18 more cattle and killed 21 others, leaving the rations nearly gone. They had like 100 cattle, oxen, I think, at first. Another family, the Eddies, did not have any oxen or food, had to abandon their wagon, and they had to carry their children on foot. The Reed family and Margaret is the wife that's left after James is gone. They also lost their wagon. So the party reached this river, Truckee River. They found a lush terrain, but they had no time to rest as they needed to cross the Sierra Nevada before winter. Stanton,
Not Winton.
help me. I can't pronounce anything. Stanton, I put Winter and Stanton together.
Yeah.
Stanton, who had sought help a month earlier, returned with supplies, mules, and two Miwok guides. So Miwok tribe was a Native American tribe. These men were named Lewis and Salvador. He also brought news that Reed had reached Sutter's Fort, which, yeah, he made it. He was fine. Well, he wasn't fine, but he made it. It
Good.
offered a brief glimmer of hope, yet the hardest trial still laid ahead.
Sorry to keep ruminating on this,
No, it's
but
fine.
James Reed, he gets kicked
Mm-hmm.
out. His wife is still there
Mm-hmm. With their
with the
children.
rest of everyone else, with the rest of the
Yeah.
people that just kicked her husband out for
Yes.
protecting her.
Yeah.
I would be losing my mind if I was her. I would be so
Yeah.
angry.
Yeah. I agreed,
Yeah.
honestly. But I think when you're doing this, like this is kind of the whole thing of the story. It's like it's survival, you know? The
Yeah,
people are
I
trying to
guess.
figure out the best way to survive, and I guess they have to make decisions.
I think that's honestly the scariest part to me is not even like the very obvious things that would kill you in something like this, like,
Yeah,
lack of water, lack of food, but like it's like the mob mentality stuff of like
it is. Yeah.
once a group decides that you're done.
Hmm. Yeah,
It's
because you're so
crazy.
tired, you're sleep deprived, you don't have food, you don't have water, you're
Mhm.
not thinking clearly. Like,
Everyone's pushed to their limit.
yeah. So they're faced with one last journey to go through the mountain range.
So where are they at now?
They're at the Truckee River, which is right before there's a pass that goes through the Sierra Nevada mountain range. It's now known as the Donner Pass. So they're
Yeah.
there now.
Okay.
Yeah, they're in California at this point, but they're not past the mountain range. So the party had to decide if they wanted to continue to push on or rest their cattle. It was now October 20th, and they had been told that the pass, now known as the Donner Pass, would not be covered with snow until mid-November. So they had about a month. Family by family, they rejoined their journey. So one family started and the next and the next. So they were kind of broken up at this point. While traveling through the rough terrain, an axle broke on the Donner's wagon, and while trying to replace it, George Donner sliced his hand open. He remembers recalling this and saying he just thought it was a superficial wound. It was not something that was going to stop him. They'd already made it this far. They needed to continue. They needed to get their family to the other side. Waiting on the Donner family, the party reached Truckee Lake and decided to set up camp. They woke up one morning to an inch of snow and realized that winter was, in fact, on its way. They made the decision to try to summit the Sierra Nevada. Charles Stanton became the leader at this point because he apparently knew the way. And the two Miwoks, Lewis and Salvador, also knew the mountain very well. Lewis and Salvador did not know a lot of English, but they did know they could identify landmarks.
Lewis and Salvador was the name of the
The
of
two
the Indians?
Miwoks, I think that was their American given names.
Yeah. Okay. It's like,
That was not their actual, yeah.
oh, okay.
So this is the part of the story. So we're kind of through the like beginning of the travel. This is
Mhm.
it. There's so many people, it gets confusing. So I don't go over every single death because I think it's just, I was like, what? But if you're like, how did the number get there? They died.
Okay.
So on November 2nd, the party attempted to summit the mountain, bringing the wagons up proved to be nearly impossible. Everyone got off the wagon. The men tried to push them to try and help the oxen. And then the women, who were so exhausted at this point, carried their children. Stanton had to attempt to push ahead, but when he returned, he saw that the members had come to a complete standstill. Stanton tried to convince them to keep going, but he was unsuccessful. So they laid their blankets down. They tried to sleep on the ground. Some slept in the wagons. They found some pine to burn and create fires, and they went to sleep. The next morning, a man named Louis Keysburg woke up to find that the snow had covered literally everything. He called out, and heads began popping out of the snowbanks. They had been buried by the winter storm while they slept. 10 feet of snow covered the path ahead. They had a decision to make to either continue to summit the mountain or to turn back to the lake. After a very heated discussion, they decided it would be best to go back to the lake at this point. Smart. I mean, if you have to choose, I don't know how you're going to get through 10 feet of snow. You
No,
can't.
you're already exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So back at the lake, there's a family called the Breen family. They found a cabin which they occupied. I believe this cabin was 140 square feet, and I think something like 20 people were living in it. There was two other cabins that were found. The Eddies and the Murphys occupied the two other ones, and then the Keysburg family built a lean against the Breen's house. It's so many families. So they've got three cabins, a kind of makeshift one, and that brought the total to 60 people. 19 men, 12 women, 29 children. They sent a messenger up the stream to find the Donners. Once the Donners had heard of what happened in the mountain, they constructed a cabin by the lake for shelter. This was a little bit farther away from the rest of the cabins. George was injured and weak after travel. Obviously, his hand was sliced open. It took them much longer to build the cabin, and the snow began piling around them. By this time, the original party of 87 people was now down to 81. So life at the lake was miserable. Food was scarce, cabins were cramped and filthy, and the snow was so deep they were unable to leave their cabin for days at a time. They had to kill all their cattle and their ox and horses to have food. I believe they just left their bodies in the snow to just keep them, you know, they kept them there. But they would have to eat boiled ox hide and horse bones. They would boil them over and over and over. It got to the point they said where the horse bones were so brittle that they could like chew them. It had just gotten to that point. They had created rugs and blankets out of the hides, but eventually started eating those for, source of nutrients because they had
Hmm.
literally nothing. Meanwhile, James Reed is still at Sutter's Fort, but he had recovered enough energy to try and return to his family. He was accompanied by a man named Bill McCutcheon, and 40 horses were provided by the Sutters. Food was also provided, and multiple of the Miwok employees that worked at the Sutter Fort came with them. The men arrived at the western side of the mountain and they expected to find the Donner family, but instead they found a migrant couple who had been separated from their company. The weather became exceedingly harsh and they continued to try to climb up the mountain, but it was 9 feet of snow and they decided that it was just too much and they headed back to Sutter's Fort. Once they turned around, they learned that they'd only been 10 or 12 miles from the Donner Party. So they were fairly close. Okay, so back at the camp at the lake, the snow stopped one day and Graves decided that they could no longer wait. They needed to try and summit the mountain again. So on December 16th, a party of 17 men, women, and children set out to attempt to cross the mountain pass. They made homemade snowshoes, which proved to be fairly useful, and they called themselves the Forlorn Hope. The snowshoes proved to be efficient, but they were out of food and not accustomed to the weather. By the third day, three of them had gone snowblind. So Stanton began straggling behind and he grew weaker and weaker. And at one point, he sat down and he did not get back up. And his wife asked him what was going on. And he said, I'll get up and I'll come join you guys. But he was never seen again. So, without their guide, they were relying exclusively on Lewis and Salvador, who spoke very, very little English, and they were unable to make out landmarks that were buried in the snow. Out of food and lost, arguments grew, and some began saying that they should turn back yet again, but they couldn't do it because they couldn't return without any food. Desperate, a man named Patrick Dolan spoke up. He said that one of them should volunteer to die in order to feed the others. While they all initially found this idea horrifying, they slowly came to the realization that this would be the only way to survive. They cast 5 strips for each man and pulled them. The one with the longest one would be the one to die. And Patrick Dolan was the one that had the strip. They all stood
He
around
was
and
the one
stared.
who recommended the idea in the first place.
Yeah. So they all
But
stood
he was
around and
regretting it then.
I know. And stared at each other and realized that murder was still murder and they just couldn't do it. Eddie pointed out that one of them was bound to die soon anyway. So, a man named Antonio, who was the animal handler, was the first to die. And he actually died because his hand fell into a fire pit that they had built. he was at the point of caring, he didn't care and he just let himself catch fire. Franklin Graves was the next to die, and before he died, he told the rest of them to do whatever they needed to do to survive. The fate of his daughters relied on the rest of the forlorn hope. He instructed them to eat his corpse once he died. So, as the blizzard progressed, Dolan actually began to rant deliriously, and he actually stripped off his clothes and began running into the woods. This is one of the final stages of hypothermia. It's called paradoxical undressing. And so, in the early stages of hypothermia, your blood vessels will shut off to conserve the warmth and the core of your body. So, like in your extremities, your hands, feet, that's why they go numb. But in the final stages of hypothermia, the blood vessels open back up, which causes an intense feeling of heat to course throughout the body. Dolan did return to the rest of the group and slip back to sleep, but he never woke up again.
I'm sorry to rewind. Is
Mm-hmm.
this a separate group from the Donner Party right now?
Yeah, so the Donner Party stayed at the lake. The
Yeah.
Donner
Okay.
Party. It's actually crazy that they call it the Donner Party because a lot of this is not even about the Donners, but I guess, I don't know. Okay. 5 men and 5 women remained in the forlorn hope. On the morning of the 26th of December, the group decided what they needed to do. They decided they needed to eat the dead members of their group in order to survive, in order to carry on. So this is where the cannibalism starts. Eddie and Luis and Salvador all refused to eat it. Luis and Salvador said it was against their religion. They did not believe in that type of thing. They were Native Americans and they said they just absolutely could not do it. As they continued to travel, one man suggested that they kill Luis and Salvador for food, who had not eaten in 9 days and were most likely pretty close to death. At this point, they were like getting pretty comfortable with the idea of eating each other. The next morning, Luis and Salvador were gone, most likely knowing what had been discussed, and they fled off. Days later, the group actually encountered them again and shot them in the back of the head and used their bodies for food.
Jesus Christ.
Right? I know.
Oh my God.
They said that they saw them and they were emaciated, worse off when they saw them last, and they knew that they were going to die anyway. So it's just like so sad. I remember hearing this for the first time and felt so bad for those 2 men because I'm like, they weren't part of this. They were just trying to
Mm-mm.
help and like, I,
God.
yeah, I'm like these
And
stupid.
I'm sorry. I understand desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. We're towing the line. No, we're actually way past the line of just like
Yeah.
straight up being disrespectful. If someone's saying no,
Mm-hmm.
like I can only assume that they also are saying like don't eat me if I die.
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
they
Like
said
I'm
that they were
sure
so lean that there was virtually nothing.
nothing there. I'm sure that refusing to eat other people was probably also saying like when I die, don't eat me, please.
Probably. Yeah, I'm sure.
And I'm sure they just did not listen to that. But
Yeah.
okay. Also, is it true when people say like when you get a taste for like human flesh, then your body like craves it or something? Like it messes with your
Um,
like brain chemistry or something? I've
yeah,
heard,
I think so.
yeah. I asked AI what happens, and it was like cannibalism is a natural part of the animal kingdom and is found in more than 1,500 species.
All right.
Okay, AI. Please don't. You can get some like really specific diseases from eating certain proteins found in human brain tissue, and it leads to neurological degeneration. So, like, you go crazy essentially.
Oh,
So, which would make sense.
yes, I do think that cannibalism does probably affect your brain. I don't think we're supposed to do that.
Yeah, you can get mad cow disease. It can cause Alzheimer's, early onset Alzheimer's. It causes a laughing sickness that is essentially pathological bursts of laughter. Crazy. Okay. Anyways,
So finally, on January 17th, after 33 days of traveling, the survivors finally made it to the edge of Sacramento Valley. They came across a Native American tribe who provided them with some food and helped them get across. On February 18th, a month later, the people who had made it to Sacramento Valley regained their strength and they got a 7-man rescue party, including Eddie, to scale the Donner Pass again to find the encampment where the rest of their party lived. At this point, the party had been stranded for 2 months in the cabins. The cabins were buried in snow. 13 people at the camps were dead, and there were bodies virtually everywhere. Eddie stated that when they got there, we saw a woman emerged from a hole in the snow, and as we approached her, several others made their appearance. They were gaunt with famine, and I can never forget the horrible, ghastly sight they presented. The woman that emerged from the snow yelled out, "Are you the men from California, or did you come from heaven?" The next day, they traveled to the Donner family, who was in the cabin on the other end of the lake. And George was bedridden from the cut that had happened when he was trying to fix his wagon, and his entire arm was infected. So he was not doing too great. They took 23 people from the rescue party and they left 21 at the cabins at Truckee Lake and 12 at the Donner house, which was at a place called Alder Creek. Several of them did die on the way back, but the group did eventually make its way to civilization. So that was the first relief party. They struggled a lot going back, but majority of them did make it. On March 1st, there was a second relief party, which actually had Reed and McCutcheon. They tried again. They had more people this time. But before they arrived, it said that this is when the survivors at the lake began to turn to cannibalism. Georgia Donner said that the adults had finally decided they needed to prepare the human flesh to feed the youngest children, and they figured they were too young to taste it and tell the difference. Patrick Breen documented a disturbing visit from Mrs. Murphy, who shared that her family was considering eating Milt Elliott, which was a boy that had died. Soon after, Reed and McCutcheon discovered Elliott's mutilated body. They found his body in the snow, and it was a sign that they were desperate at Truckee Lake. At the Alder camp, the Donner camp, things were equally dire. The first rescuers to reach it were horrified, and they saw a man carrying a human leg with him. When they confronted him, he tossed it into a hole into the snow, which contained the dismembered body of Jacob Donner, who had died earlier. Inside the camp, Elizabeth Donner refused to eat, even though her children were being sustained by the remains of their father. The rescuers found that 3 other bodies had been consumed, and in the other tent, Tamsin's daughter appeared to be in pretty good health, but her husband, George, was gravely ill from the wound in his hand that had reached his shoulder. So they chose more people in that second relief group to journey back to the Sacramento Valley. It was called Bear Valley, but it was an excruciating journey. A sudden blizzard forced Reed to send 2 men ahead to retrieve the first cache of food, anticipating the arrival of the third relief party. And during the storm, 5-year-old Isaiah Donner froze to death and Reed almost died. Mary Donner suffered severe burns after unknowingly sleeping with her frostbitten feet in the fire. When the storm passed, the Breen and Graves family were too weak to continue, having not eaten for days. The relief party was forced to leave them behind, and the place where they were abandoned is now known as Starved Camp. Margaret Breen did her best to keep the others alive, but tragically, Elizabeth Greaves and her son Franklin died before the next rescue party could reach them. Despite the survival, the remaining members resorted to cannibalism, once again consuming the bodies of the deceased.
I would imagine that they're probably getting sick too from eating.
I'm sure they are. So, 3 members of the relief party had stayed behind to help at those camps. Charles Stone was at Truckee Lake, and then Charles, Katie, and Nicholas Clark were at the Donner camp. While Clark was hunting one day, Stone traveled to the Donner camp to make plans with Katie, and the group decided they needed to return to California. Tamsin Donner arranged for her daughters Eliza, Georgia, and Frances to accompany them, and for $500, she would pay them to bring them back. Stone and Katie took the girls to Truckee Lake, but left them with Keysburg and Leneva Murphy and continued back to Bear Valley. After 2 days, Katie recalled that they passed Starved Camp but did not help. So, yeah, they saw them starving and they were like, oops, gotta go. Days later, Clark and Trudeau, which were 2 people who were part of the relief party, they went back essentially to try and salvage any of their belongings. They essentially just wanted to take everything and get money for it. But when they got there, they found skulls that had been cut open. They found pieces of bodies along the lake, along the encampments. And it was Keseberg who essentially just ate everyone that was left. He claimed that Mrs. Murphy had died a week after the second relief party left, and later Tamsin Donner had arrived at his cabin soaked and upset. He said he gave her a blanket and advised her to leave the next morning, but during the night she died. The salvage party was pretty suspicious of Keseberg's story and discovered a pot filled with human flesh, along with George Donner's pistols, jewelry, and $250 in gold. Keseberg confessed that he had hidden the Donner's money at the Tamsons' request and intended for it to be for their children, but he seemed detached at this point and somewhat mad from his experience. He later stated that I am fluent in 4 languages, yet in none of them do I find the words enough to express the horror I experienced during those 2 months. Keseberg was the last member of the Donner Party to return safely. In total, 41 members of the group died in the tragedy.
So wait, are people suspicious that he murdered people
Yeah,
and they
so
didn't
like
die?
that's
Like,
what they think. It was like the amount of bodies that they found. I mean, the part where the skulls were like opened, like they didn't believe him when he said that he just ate their dead bodies. They think that he did it because he was like just desperate for money and wanted to have that stuff when he got saved.
hmm.
Yeah. They did find George Donner's severed head at the cabin. So they think he was murdered. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
they all made it back. Well, not all of them.
I was
41 of
gonna
them died,
say,
but
doesn't sound like
at that point, no one was left there. They were all
okay.
back. Everyone that
All
was
right.
alive had made it back. But I mean, it's like this is like a story about, the human spirit, like the lengths we go to survive, like the decisions we have to make in those moments. And a lot of
Hmm.
the members of the party afterwards denied that they ate people. They
I mean,
said
I
that there
probably
was
would
no
deny it too.
cannibalism. I think there was a good amount of outrage, like when they tried to get the relief parties going. Like a lot of people wouldn't do it because they heard of what happened, and they started printing it in the press.
Yeah.
They wouldn't help them out. I mean, this isn't the only case of people having to eat each other. There was a plane crashed in Uruguay, or it had a Uruguayan soccer team on it, and they
Hmm.
crashed in the mountains. I don't know exactly where, but they recalled it saying that it wasn't even a question. They knew that was what they were going to have to do to survive. They just saw it as meat, and
Yeah.
they just made the decision to do it.
Have you seen Yellow Jackets, the
Yeah, so that's
TV
what
show?
it's based off of, that plane crash.
Yeah, because I rewatched it recently and I remember thinking to myself, especially as you watch all of the things that happened leading
Mm-hmm.
up to it, I was
Mm-hmm.
like, I would probably I could see myself being in the mentality where I would do that.
If it's between like life and death, I mean, they were eating rugs. I mean, not eating people and eating rugs are two very different things, but like
It's desperation
it's
for
desperation.
sure.
You're
Yeah.
just trying to find literally anything you can.
Hmm.
And I remember like a podcast or something, they said that when they arrived at the lake at one point, that the people that were left didn't even look human. They were just tall, like thin, just literally looked like skeletons. So they were
Hmm.
starved beyond the point. And when some of the relief parties did get there, actually, they did give them food, but they were so careful to not overfeed them. They would tie the food up in the trees so that they wouldn't overeat because their
Yeah.
stomachs had shrunk. And one person actually did die because they got into the food and overate, and they passed
Like that
away.
would be me.
I know, same. I'm like, I don't have any
Right.
self-control. Actually, I'd be so worried.
Oh my God.
But some of the people that survived, I mean, so the list of people, I mean, they were children that
Hmm.
survived.
Right.
Let's see, the
Well, it sounds
youngest.
like the children like everything the adults did, they did for the
Hmm.
children. It sounds
Hmm.
like they sacrificed
Yeah.
a lot to make sure that they
Yeah.
were okay.
Right.
Were any of the Donner family members, did any of them survive?
Yes. Mary Donner survived. I actually, Aletha, Leanna, so like the children, it looks like, were the ones that survived.
Hmm.
And I think it was because their mother was the one, she fed them, like she wouldn't eat. She didn't resort to cannibalism, but yeah.
So, but that is crazy how the pass is named after the Donner family and the Donner like
Hmm.
the whole story is like the Donner
Yeah.
story. But most of the story that you just told me does not involve them.
Yeah. And sorry, that was like so confusing because I mean, there's 90 people in this, and
It's a
I was
lot.
like, and like two people are named Eddie and three people
Yeah.
are named Mary. I was like, what? But yeah, I mean, it's something I think about it so often. I'm like, what
Hmm.
were they thinking? Like, what was it like being, I mean, it's to start out the journey with optimism, I'm sure, as they did, and excitement to start a new life. And it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And to sit in those houses for 2 months waiting.
Waiting and watching people die around you.
Yeah, watching everyone die around you.
Hmm. This is random, but when you were talking about them eating the hides that they were using for blankets, that reminds
Hmm.
me of in old like westerns. My dad used to watch a bunch
Yeah,
of western movies, and I don't remember what movie this is from, but like the pioneers, they used to like
yeah,
boil their leather belts and stuff.
yeah. Oh,
And
yeah, I remember that.
yeah, for nutrients because it was just something to like
Hmm. Right,
get
right,
into their system. And this was before they used like a bunch of, well, they probably still used chemicals for tanning hides and stuff, but like
right. But it's
um
probably different.
right, don't boil your leather belt now. It will probably
It's
kill
not,
you.
it's not usually not leather, it's
Yeah.
polyurethane.
Even if it is leather though, the stuff that they use to tan leather is not
Yeah.
good for you. But anyways, that it reminded me of that. And I remember watching that as a kid and being like, ugh, I would rather die. I would never eat my belt.
Yeah.
But
You'll go
no, I
to
probably
great
would.
lengths to survive. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah, no, I probably would. I don't know. Because we've talked about too, like if we were in an apocalypse like situation, would we try to survive or would we just say sayonara?
I it's like apocalypse, like if the whole world is on fire and there's
Mm, yeah,
like
that's true.
aliens or zombies, like no, but this type of situation probably I would see myself like
Trying.
trying.
I don't know. I've also never been starving before. So like,
Absolutely not.
my brain would probably not be working very well.
No, you don't think clearly when you're sleep
No.
deprived, and you don't think clearly when you're starved, and like that's
Right.
also a different type of pain. Starvation is like
Yeah.
incredibly painful.
Well, and the part where they were walking through the desert and they were so thirsty,
Mm.
you can survive without food for like a week or something like that,
Yeah, you
right?
can
For a
only go like three
while.
days without water.
Yeah, you can't go very long without water.
Mm-mm.
And I would imagine, again, I have no experience with either one of
Yeah,
these things, but I would imagine dying of thirst would be excruciatingly painful. Dying
I
of
don't even
starvation,
know what
yes, would
happens.
as well. But like I am comparing it to when I wake up and I feel like I haven't had water in like 10
Oh,
years.
you feel so bad. Yeah, I know. You're like so,
Like,
you're
oh my
so
God.
dry.
Yeah.
The
And
hypothermia part would be the best way to go if
you
I
think
was in
so?
that situation. Yeah, because drowning and freezing to death are the best ways to die.
Really?
Um,
Drowning would be?
yeah, your brain releases some sort of, it's like I don't want to say it's oxytocin, but it releases something and you feel euphoric. Um,
Oh,
and it doesn't feel, I mean, I think when you're in the act of drowning, you're probably panicking, but when you are about to
I've
die.
always thought it would be so painful to drown because like water
Yeah,
in
I mean, it
your
probably is, but they say it's like one of the, I don't know. I don't want to drown. I don't want to freeze to death.
I
Being set on fire is the most painful way to die.
I Can't even can't
It's
even
like
imagine.
just the absolute worst. But
Well,
yeah,
that's a very interesting
it's a
story.
very depressing story,
Very
honestly.
depressing story.
Makes me like really sad. I know it's like dark out. I can't go for a walk now. I had to go for a walk after I finished my notes because I was like,
Yeah.
whoo, if I stay in my apartment after that, I'm gonna not feel
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is so interesting.
Yeah. It also, so this is, I don't mean this to be disrespectful at all. But this is
To
a
me.
great example of the arrogance of human beings, too.
Oh yeah, you need to respect nature
Absolutely.
because she will always win.
She will always win. And also, justice for James Reed. If somebody was beating up my ox and then hit my wife, you're getting stabbed. It's going to happen.
Hmm.
You get
Yeah,
what you get. You get it's survival of the fittest. And then you're going to banish him?
I
No.
know.
He survived in the end, right?
Yeah, he was the
Okay.
one who came back for everyone. And it was interesting because one of the people that banished him, who like voted to banish him, he found him and he gave him food, washed his hair, and like it was kind of this sweet moment and no one talked about it. He was like, it's okay, you know, we've
I
all
mean,
been through.
honestly, it was probably kind of a blessing that he got banished
Probably because he
in a
made
way.
it, you
He
know?
made it. Yeah, he made it. Obviously, super shitty thing to do. Probably not what he would have wanted at all,
No,
but
but
yeah.
I mean, he could have died, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ugh, yikes.
Well,
Okay, well,
all right.
okay. Well, thank you for listening, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like what you heard, don't forget to show us some love and like, rate, and subscribe to our podcast on whichever platform you choose.
You can also find us on Instagram at livelaughLore_pod, on TikTok at Live Laugh Lore Podcast, and on our YouTube channel, Live Laugh Lore.
And if you have any questions, comments, or just want to say hi, feel free to email us at podcast.livelaughLore@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.